morning. We're going to carry on looking at the causes of the First World War. Yesterday I had asked you to watch a video about the assassination of the Archduke Franz Ferdinand and to fill in the form that talks about the different events and how absurd they were. So I wanted to go over with you some of the things that I found were completely ridiculous. So the first one was that Ferdinand himself thought that he was going to be well protected because he was wearing 7 religious talismans. So basically he thought that if he had a lucky rabbit's foot on him, that he was okay. He also thought that the fabric of his jacket was bulletproof. I don't know about you, but when I saw this, I couldn't help but think about the Emperor's New Clothes, that old story. The fact that the assassins practiced target practice in an open park and nobody batted an eye, nobody called the cops. That just seems so strange to me. When they are lining up to watch the parade, the one guy just very casually asks a police officer which car the Archduke will be riding in, and he gets told. That would never happen today. That would never happen. Ferdinand himself rides in an open car, despite the fact that he was warned by local authorities that he was none too popular. But then the government itself didn't do anything. They didn't deploy any of the army. They only had 120 police officers there to protect the heir to the throne. When the assassination is supposed to happen, first of all, the car goes right past the first assassin, who does nothing. Gets to the second assassin at least does something, but for all his practicing in the open park, he forgot that there was a 10-second delay on the bomb, and so he threw it, but they sort of drove right over it. Unfortunately, it did blow up in the car that was behind it, and people were injured that way. But he doesn't stick around. He takes the cyanide, which I'm not sure who had provided the cyanide, but it was old, and so it didn't work, and it only made him sick. But just to be doubly sure, he then decided he was going to jump in the river. But the river was only 4 inches deep. I mean, come on, 4 inches deep. He didn't check. I also felt that it was rather strange that after all of this training and all of this preparation, the other assassins were too stunned to actually try again. Then when the royal party gets to City Hall, the mayor babbles on with his prepared speech. That's not the absurd part, because he didn't know about the attempt on the Archduke's life. The absurd part was that Ferdinand responds with his prepared remarks. It's absolutely nuts. I love the fact that Planchet is so rattled and then just randomly decides he's going to go for a sandwich. I mean, SNL, come on. The royal driver. Now, this is a guy whose job it is to drive royal people around, and he gets lost and takes a wrong turn. And not only does he take a wrong turn, this professional royal driver, but when he puts the car into reverse, jams the gears. And finally, Planchet himself, now having committed the assassination, takes his cyanide, but as you can guess, it wasn't terribly effective because, if the other one wasn't effective, why would this one be? So those were the things that I found to be absurd. If you have missed any of these ones, please feel free to put them in. If you had things in there that you noticed that I haven't got in here, send me a message and indicate that, and I'll see if I can add it in as well. All right, so now we're going to go back to the video, the PowerPoint and the notes, so please get those out. All right, so this is where we had finished off yesterday, so we're going to carry on now, and we are going to look at the actual causes of the war. So even though the death of Ferdinand was the event that started the war, it wasn't the cause. There are 4 reasons that the countries in Europe were ready to go to war, and this is where you get your acronym from. They are militarism, alliances, imperialism, and nationalism. So we're going to have a look at each one of these, starting with militarism. So first of all, we got to figure out what is militarism. Militarism is a belief that a country needs to have a powerful military force. Now, they want that for 2 reasons. First of all, they think of it as a guarantee of peace. After all, who would be crazy enough to attack the most powerful nation? So they feel it's a deterrent. But in the event that, people aren't deterred and a war does break out, well, you've at least got your military ready to go and you're able to defend yourself. So how did militarism lead to the war? Before 1914, there was something called an arms race in Europe. An arms race is what happens when different countries, because they're so suspicious of each other, decide that they're going to build bigger, badder, better war machines. So they want a bigger military. They want bigger, badder weapons. They want more than anybody else has. And if country A hears that country B is building up its army, country A gets worried, and so they build up their army. Country B hears that country A is building up its army, they get paranoid, and so they build up their army even more and invent more war machines and things like that. So you can understand how everything gets escalated. So this is very, very tense times. Now, Germany had the strongest army, but Great Britain had the strongest navy, and that kind of balanced each other out. So because the one power block had one part that was really strong, and the other power block had the other part that was really strong, there was sort of a balance there. However, then Germany started to build ships, and that threatened Great Britain's navy. So Britain got very worried, and they started to build more ships and get more men to join the army. And this created a huge backlash in Britain, by the way, because Britain had really doubled down on building the navy, but what that meant was that more of the shipyard workers were kind of being drafted into working overtime, longer time, vacation time was canceled, everybody had to work longer and harder, and actually for less money. So there was an awful lot of social unrest that went along with this. So each country became more and more suspicious of everyone else, and the newspapers didn't help. This was the era of yellow journalism, and the purpose of a newspaper was not to inform people, but rather to sell newspapers. And so the stories had to be exciting, they had to be salacious, they had to make it so that it was all really, really exciting and all these cliffhangers, and the headlines would always be the worst possible outcome. So if there was a political crisis, instead of calming people down, the headlines would say, "It's going to be war!" And the result was people got more and more and more worried. So over the years, people would become scared, then calm, then scared again. And this is really hard. Ask anybody who lived through the Cold War era. 40 years of this up and down, and you know what? After a while, people are just ready for a fight. Now, militarism created a lot of new products. So the technology of the repeating gun, like the Gatling gun, became the machine gun. The tanks were developed. Now, tanks were developed in secret, and they really weren't very useful at first. The way they got the name tank, by the way, was because when they were being developed in Britain, the government had to keep moving the tank itself around to different places so that they could test it out on different terrains. But they had to put a great big box over it so that the spies wouldn't be able to report back what it was that was being moved around. But they had to have a good excuse for having such a very, very large box. And the only thing that they could think of that was big enough was a water tower. And so they labeled these boxes water tank. And the tank word just stuck. Submarines were developed during this time as well, and they were probably the most frightening of all of the developments, because the submarine, nobody knew that a submarine was there until it was surfacing in order to fire the missiles. Back then, the first submarines, they had to surface in order to fire the missiles, otherwise the seawater would flood the torpedo tubes, which would flood the actual submarine itself. So they would surface, fire their missiles, and then go back down again. Sonar had not yet been developed, so nobody would ever know if there was a submarine near them until they were attacked. Flight was another thing. So the first airplanes, the first airplane was actually in 1903, so that was the first manned flight. But by 1914, you have airplanes that look more like this. So they go from that silly thing that the Wright brothers flew to this thing, and then by the end of the war, they already are starting to look much more like the airplanes that you're going to see in World War II. Okay, that's as far as I'm going to go on this video. I need you to now go on to the next video, the one that says Part 3, and we're going to carry on with alliances.